Bob here, Chopper Bob Customs, and it's been a while since the last video. Spent a lot of time on this fuel line that I didn't want to spend on it, and rather than bog down in the tedium, I just wanted to slog through it, get it done and out of the way. I'd like to say it's done, but basically the difficult parts are done. The last little bits of getting it hooked up to the Phytech and to the gas tank need to be done, but that's hopefully going to cover some of that today in the video on making stainless braided line AN fittings. Quick update on some of the other things. The 39 Ford, the guy that was originally going to do the upholstery work retired and said he wasn't going to do it, has now made some indications that he might be going to go forward with doing the top. That might be his last upholstery job, and so we're waiting to see what happens there. None of you commented on who we might try to look at in the Oklahoma City area, so I need to tell you up front: comment, subscribe, like. The other thing that I need to talk about is the 350 that I pulled out of this Delray. It has sold, so the gentleman came and picked it up Saturday. It's going to go in a K10 square body for his teenage daughter, so it's almost like a marriage made in heaven. Teenager, K10 square body, and a good running 350. So that's all taken care of. It's gone. So I've got one more engine sitting in the shop here that needs to go someplace, and it's going to be going in here. Why don't I stop the video, and then I'm going to take you on a quick tour of the fuel lines, and then we're going to get started on doing today's work. Okay, as pointed out in a previous video, I've got the lines back at the tank. I've got the tank down right now. The rearmost line is the pressure line, and the forward one is the return line. And they go over and are solidly mounted to the frame, go up over the shock mount. I haven't put the shock back in yet. Got to do that. I got to come over the rear end, come around the suspension area right there, and are attached just above where the emergency brake cable is attached. And then they go into the unions that connect it to the center, the intermediate pieces. And here you can see where I put the armor on them to try and protect them, because that hole basically has them together, and it has it contacting the sides, top and bottom of the hole that they go through. So it's really tight in through here, and that's why I use the armor. Plus the fact that there is no way to attach the intermediate tubes with the equipment that I do have. Basically, the fuel lines go over top of the frame right here, and let me get repositioned so that I'm not running over my cord, which I've already done. Okay, let me get that out of the way. Sorry about that. Anyway, the intermediate lines then come through here, and this has a lot more room, so I didn't use the armor. It's away from the frame and the floor, and it's clamped right here. And then there's the unions that connect to the forwardmost lines. And let me get repositioned here again. And they come up over the cross member for the transmission, are attached right there. And then to make sure that they didn't get into the headers, I flipped them around and ran them on top of the frame. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these tight bends here, or what I had to do it. And let me stop the camera, and I'm going to get out from underneath here and show you some things. Final
for now anyway, handheld moment. This is where the fuel lines are attached to the top of the frame rail, and then I've got them coming up. And as you can see, they're roughed in. The thing I have to decide once I get the engine in, and these two tubes are actually easy to take in and out. So undo them at the union, take them over and do the work on the bench on them, and then come back and put them back in the car. The thing I've got to decide is where I'm going to end up with on height, and whether I'm going to put a 90-degree bend in these to point them over to the back of the Phytech unit, or whether I'm going to use a 90-degree AN fitting to get them hooked up to the braided stainless. And the other thing that I'm going to have to do is I'm probably going to, from right here, run over a bracket to mount these solidly to keep them from doing too much wobbling. So there's that. So, but there you can see I'm from the tank to the engine, and I've got a plan moving forward. Okay, so I mentioned before that the 41, I didn't have a whole lot of problem bending the tube with it, and I realized I was 2 nuts short on getting this put together on the Delray, and I had some black nuts, but I kind of wanted to go with the bright silver ones so that they were all the same. And I remembered I had some tubes that I had made for the 41 back in the day, and had left nuts on them in case I needed to use it in the future for something. They were rather complicated pieces, and that's what I wanted to show you here. I used that tubing bender that I was using to make this part right here, and this tube bent 180 degrees without crimping, and I've got some very tight complex bends in this, and it basically bent very well and didn't cause the problems that the stuff I've been getting lately caused. And here again, I don't know whether it's the tube or whether I just have to go back and find the supplier I got this stuff from. Now, I'll tell you this stuff did not flare all that easily, and the green stuff that I put on here flared great. I had one flare that I had to cut off, and it was my fault. I should have known better. When I went to cut the tube before I flared it, the tubing cutter walked and actually put threads on the end of the tube, and instead of cutting those off, I tried to cheat and put a flare in there, and it turned out to be a pretty bad flare. But the rest of them, double flares, they all came out looking great. This stuff was a little bit harder to flare, but man, it was a lot better to bend these tight bends, and it would have been a lot better on this car than what and here again, I've tried different brands, I've tried different styles. I've tried the nickel copper stuff that's out now. It bends real easy, and it also crushes real easy. And this PFA coated stuff, what I finally did on some of the tighter bends, I didn't go over about 30-40 degrees, and I actually greased the tubing with Amsoil multi-purpose grease, and I used a pair of channel locks to keep the bender tight. So I don't know, maybe my bender's worn out, maybe I need to get a different bender. But if you've experienced this, or if you have anything that you can suggest, leave me a comment, because it's driving me nuts. Because like I said, I knew on the 41 that I was making just incredible bended pieces, and I can't do that with this stuff. Anyway, back to where we're going to go. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be getting in the engine compartment and welding up those damaged areas on the radiator support. As I pointed out on the video when I cut the, as Martin calls it, the doobie dauber cross member out that they mounted the radiator in, I got a little bit close to the radiator's core support, and has some thin spots, have a couple of holes, and I need to address those right now. So that's what I'm going to do while the engine's out and I can get in here. It's not necessarily the most comfortable way to do it, but I'm not going to take the core support out. Let's see if I can get down in here. I don't know if I'll be able to get out, but here we go. What I'm going to do first is I've got this hole right here, and I'm just going to do some really quick pops around it and start filling it in from the sides, alternating back and forth from one side to the next. I seem to have thinned it out a little bit more than even I thought. In a previous video where I was having problems with this grinder, this is just a cheapo Harbor Freight grinder, and I have abused it. You can see I've hung it by the cords. It's just a wreck, but it was working great until the last video, and I thought it had finally shot craps on me. And I got to looking at it, and what had happened was, from the vibration, these little plastic plugs that hold the brushes in had come loose, and that's what makes the contact. It screws down tight and actually presses a washer down on the electrical contact that's in the body of the unit. So when those back off, it creates a gap to where you beat on it and it'll run, and you beat on it and it'll run. But what had happened was, this one had been loose for so long, it had been arcing the way that it had, it overheated the spring and the brush, and the spring was broke. So basically I had one where the switch had fallen apart, and I've been saving it for parts, so I managed to scavenge a brush out of it and stick it in this, and it fired right back up. So, you know, I think they're trying to phase these out because they're trying to get into a higher end deal, these Chicago Electric things. But, you know, I've got a ton of these Chicago Electric grinders, and I don't treat them right, and they still treat me right, so I can't complain about that. And just a little bit of advice for you on check those plastic plugs every now and again. I should have known that a long time ago. Anyway, let me get back to cleaning this mess up. Oh, that's another thing, Harbor Freight. This thing, I never oil it, and I've had this for probably, I don't know, 20 years. Now, you got to understand something. I'm not really doing Chopper Bob Customs to make a living. I'm doing it because men my age retire, they sit down in front of the TV set, and in 2 years you read their obituary. That's the bottom line. I'm doing this so that I can do the things that I love to do. I'm really not making any money at this, but I'm having a good time most of the time, except when I'm doing fuel lines on cars like this. But this thing is probably over 20 years old. I think I gave 10 bucks for it at Harbor Freight like 20 years ago. And I mean, the bearing, it's starting to wear out, and I'm just dreading that the replacement I'm going to get is not going to be as good as this one. But, you know, if you're doing this for a living day to day, you really need to buy the best tools. But when you're doing it like for a hobby, or like I'm doing, this is a business, and I'm going to try and make a profit, but I'm not going to try and make a living off of it. And you know, at the end of the day, if you need something that you can use once or twice a week, I can't say enough about this thing. And there you have it. Grinder and paint make me the welder I ain't. So that's all patched up. I think I'll go ahead and put a little bit of paint on this side over here just to keep it from rusting. I didn't get into the base metal on this side like I did. Probably has something to do with me being right-handed. There we go. Almost as good as new. All right, on to the next project. The 350 that was in the car had a large cap HEI in it, and the 383 that's going in it has a large cap HEI, and so it's desired to have a little bit more clearance between the firewall and the cap. And if this were a fresh build, my recommendation would be, with the car gutted, to basically cut a section of this out and build a recess in it like I did on the 39 Ford. However, since this car is basically complete and we're trying to make it as cost effective as possible to do this swap, and the owner and several other people would like to see more clearance between the cap and the firewall, I'm going to try and push this firewall back a little bit. Now, the thing that you got to be sure of when you're doing this is that what you're pushing with is stronger than what you're pushing. And I'm not 100% certain about this. So if you're not 100% certain, what you got to do is you got to make sure that you keep an eye on everything as it's moving around here to make sure that you don't go too far back here, but you don't go anywhere up here. And so I've got the porta power in here. I've got a piece of square tubing. I had a piece of square tubing on the core support. And let me see if I can fish that out of there now that I've managed to drop it down in the hole. Okay, getting back to it, I've got it out as far as I can get it towards the frame mounts on the core support. And of course I am going to have to go in the center of it, so I'm going to have to watch to make sure that it doesn't bend while I'm doing all of this. Now, let me see if I can get, I need a third hand, I think. Try next is the plastic mallet and see if I can't get it shaped a little bit to make some clearance. Okay, so you want your soft tools for this because you don't want hard, sharp edges. So I've got my plastic mallet for forming metal. I've also got a dead blow, and I've got my rubber mallet, although it's getting kind of hard. I think I need a new rubber mallet. Anyway, let's start by working this ridge right here and see if I can't get some of that knocked back. One thing I should mention, before I started this, I did get on the inside of the car and make sure I wasn't hammering into something vital. So, and then the other thing I'm trying to do is, without being very successful, I'm trying to roll this ridge back because that's what's giving it a lot of its strength. And what's happening is I'm actually rolling back over the top of it, and I think I'll be okay with that particularly if I can get it rolled back across the top of it and then start drawing it in to the divot I'm making. One thing you want to try and do is make it look like nothing has happened. And that's hard to do. But with the soft-faced hammers and with moving back and forth across the surfaces, you can minimize the appearance that you've done it. Now, this wrinkle right here, that happened actually when I put the porta power on it, and now the hammering is making it a little bit more obvious. And I've tried to work on either side of it to try and get it to go away. And basically what's happening is it's scrunching the metal together in there and making it look worse. At the end of the day, it doesn't look too bad. I've been concentrating on this side because this is basically where the distributor sits. It's more on the passenger side than on the driver's side. Not much, but a little bit. I gained a little bit of clearance, and like I said, without doing extensive surgery or damage to the car, I think I've probably gone as far as I can go. I'm gonna see if I can get some of the marks out. I've gone up top side and moved the floor mat out of the way in the trunk so I don't drill a hole through it, and I've marked where the vent is going to go, so now I'm going to drill those holes so that the vent can be attached to the car, vent rollover valve. And I've actually cheated and already drilled pilot holes, so okay. So now what I need to do is I need to make a plate with a couple of machine screws in it so that I can locate it in the trunk and tighten this all up. So let me get out from underneath it here and get set up for that. I've made a plate that is basically the same as the mounting area of this bracket that I've made for the vent rollover valve. Drilled some holes in it, and now what I'm going to do is tack those bolts to it, and then once it cools off I'll be able to take it back to the trunk, slide the two bolts through the holes in the trunk, and then I can go on the underneath side and fit the bracket to it, and I'll have the vent and rollover valve installation complete. A couple of serious tacks on it, and it'll be good to go once it pulls off. Whew. Okay. Doesn't have to look pretty, and it's not. Okay, hopefully you'll be able to hear me over the rain. We've really needed this rain. I hope we get a lot. The lake is really down. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and make the braided stainless fuel lines. Basically what I'm going to make are the two back at the tank. Show you how I do it. I know there's a lot of different tools that you can buy out there on the market. I basically use a set of soft jaws. I keep them in a plastic bag because they've got magnets on them, and like all my magnets when you're doing metal work, they tend to collect a lot of metal filing, so you want to keep them clean if at all possible. It's a struggle. I'm going to be using an AN6 aluminum wrench. Use that to stop from marring it. I'm going to use some masking tape and a Sharpie, and I'm going to be using a cutoff wheel on an angle grinder. So the first thing we'll want to do, and this is where people will buy tools to make this happen, because this is a little bit hard. It's hard on the fingertips. But the way I found to do it is you start it coming in at an angle, and then you just use a very small screwdriver to kind of push the strays in. This end right here is actually a pretty rough cut. This is from Summit, and I may, because generally speaking, if you pull the tape off fresh, you don't have as many strays as I'm getting on this one right here. Let's see how I do. That got it. Nope, it didn't. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put a cut on this real quick. So, basically, you just take and I won't have to mark it because I don't have to watch the length on it. I just need to get a fresh end. And I put 2 or 3 wraps of this around it and make life easy on yourself, and fold it over like this so when the time comes you can pull it off pretty easy. And then I just use the soft jaws to hold it. Just like that. Let's see. So, and it's easier if it's, particularly if you're right-handed, if I come in from the other side. Okay, now I was able to get that on without actually using the screwdriver. And then the next thing that you want to make sure that you've done is that you have twisted it and pushed it so that, and I don't know whether I can get this to show up on the camera or not, but if you probably can't see it, but there's a land where the threads end, and you want the rubber from the inside of the tube to be up as close to that as you can possibly get it. And sometimes that's where the struggle comes in, is getting that last little bit in there. But I like the way this one looks. Now, again, I'll use the tape. And the reason I use the tape is because I don't like to mark up the fresh stainless. But what this will do is, this will show me if this line has come out of this fitting when I tighten it up. You don't want it to move out of there more than about a 1/16 of an inch. And just a little bit above the top surface. And then what I like to do is put just a dab of oil on the very end of the part that threads in there. Just enough to help you get it started and make sure you don't gall the thread. Then by holding up on the tube and pushing down on the fitting, you get it started. And usually I'll try and run them in as far as I can by hand. But you'll reach a point where it starts getting too hard. Grab your wrench. And there, that puppy didn't move at all. So that is a good fitting at the end. Now, I had this right here, which just happened to be the correct length. And so what I'm going to do first is wrap this with tape right in this area. And you try your best to hit the middle point. It doesn't have to be perfect. It helps if it's straight, though. So much more forgiving than hardline because it's flexible, and particularly if you got it going around the corner, you can fudge on the length. Sometimes it just doesn't make any sense. This was a much cleaner cut, and it's given me more grief than the other end, which was not as clean a cut. I find that it also helps, if I haven't mentioned it, to keep upward pressure on the hose while you're threading the fitting in. And once again, it moved just a little bit, but maybe a 64th. So there we've got the pressure hose to go back to the tank. I'll make the return hose just like this. and we'll be good to go. Okay, so I've got the return line. What I did was I went underneath and determined that it needed to be 1.1 inch longer than this one, so I've marked it, cut it off, and I'm about to assemble it. You never know what's going to happen with these. So that last one, this was that cut right there, and it gave me troubles on the pressure line to put it together, but this one went right on, no problem at all. So it'll be interesting to see how this end goes right here, because this cut was very similar to the cut at the other end. It was very clean, but here you can already see it starting to spread out. So we'll see how it goes. See if I can just get it by finger. And here's the other thing. Your fingers are just going to be sore as all get out tomorrow morning when you do these. So just be prepared. And you work them back and forth to get them down. And what you'll see is, if it snags one of the wires on the braid, if you keep turning it the same direction, it's just going to keep wadding it up. Whereas if you stop, switch directions, it will generally stop that peeling back effect that you get. And you just work your way down until you are seated against the land as tight as you can get it. And that one looks pretty good. And another one nearly perfect. So there you have it. Two. I wish the hard lines had gone this easy. Let me get this under the car and then I'll show you a shot of what it's going to look like when it's finished. Okay, back to handheld. The gas tank is hanging by the straps, and I mean literally hanging by the straps. Of course, this is all going to have to come back down, but I wanted to get a feel for the fit up, make sure that everything was going to work the way it needs to, and I've still got a little bit of tweaking that I have to do on the filler neck, but that'll come along. There are the I don't think you can see the fuel pump. It's tucked back up in there. These are all just hand tight, but there are the two lines that I made today, hooking it up to the hard line, running it forward, and then the bracket for the vent and rollover valve. Of course, I'll need to pull that down and get a coat of paint on it, get the X off of it. X marks the spot, but get some paint on it so it doesn't rust, and then get it fixed back up in there. I was working on what I was going to do to run the fuel pump lines back here, and I thought, well, let's see where the sending unit lines go, and they go through a hole in the floor with no grommet. Now, I don't know whether the sheet metal has cut through the wires there or not, the insulation at least. I do know that I'm going to have to diagnose why neither fuel gauge works, and so far this is the second reason. Obviously the first was that brass float that was full of cracks. A brass float with full of cracks is called a sink, I believe. But anyway, it's I'll have a strain relief water seal insulator to make sure that the insulation on the wiring is protected and that water doesn't get up in the trunk.
when I get that done. Coming over here, I've got the shock reinstalled. I am going to have to pull this wheel off right here, and I had to put a cheater on my breaker bar to get these wheels off. I don't know how much torque they did to get them tight, but it's ridiculous. But I'm going to have to take that one off. The reason I have to take it off is the emergency brake cable is completely missing. There's the ball right there, and I'll have to come up with a connector like it's over on the other side and an emergency brake cable. Before I start buying stuff, I want to make sure that all the emergency brake equipment is inside the drum, and then we're going to have to go from there. By the way, this is a 1 year only rear suspension. Let me see if I can get back a little bit to get a better shot of this. 58 was the only year that had this. Of course, you've got the Hotchkiss style rear end. The pumpkin loads from the front. There is no rear cover. It's a one-piece, well, it's welded housing that the carrier, the case, the carrier, the ring and pinion go in from the front. And then they've got this bracket welded on the back and this huge control arm. So it's basically a 3-link rear end. Now, in 59, they went with one upper upper trailing arm. I believe it was over here on the driver's side, if I'm remembering correctly. And then it used a track bar that went from one side of the frame to the other side of the rear end to keep it from going from side to side. But in 58, they had this arrangement. Of course, in 57, they had the leaf springs. 55, 6, and 7s had leaf springs. Of course, they had parallel leaf springs back in, I don't know how far back it goes. I think it's in the 30s. My 41 has the parallel leaf springs, just like the 5, 6, 7 Chevys. But this has this deal right here, and the owner and I were talking about what kind of rear end we could put in this, because he's thinking about doing something different with the rear end, because this is I think like a 336 or 323 open differential. And but you would have to, if you want to keep the stock suspension, you're going to have to come up with something where you have that bracket on the back of the rear end so that this control arm will work. And that also means that the rear end depth is going to have to be pretty close, because there is not a whole lot of room between that control arm and the rear end. So, and you can see it looks like it's actually been hitting over here. But it's one of the unique things about this car. 1 year only. And there you have it. If you see a rear end that's got that type of thing in the center of it, the 57 to 64 style Hotchkiss rear end, this is a 58 only. So there you have it. So with that, the fuel lines are basically complete. They're not finally installed up to the front of the car. The vents are fabricated. You can see I've got clamps hanging that need to be tightened up and all that. But I think with the rain and everything, it kind of messed me up. Probably gonna call it a day, clean things up. Hopefully get the engine put in tomorrow. So until next time, please subscribe, comment, like, set the notifications, and like I said, comment. Let me know if you don't like something. Let me know why, because I'm doing this for you guys. There's no point in my just doing this if I'm not helping you or entertaining you, or at least making you say, what an idiot. So anyway, get out there and Other than that, Chopper Bob out.